July 1985. The fate of the world is hiding in the smell of a soiled diaper and a bag of potato chips. Inside the trunk of a diplomatic car, a man lies perfectly still while Soviet guard dogs circle just inches from his face. His name is Oleg Gordievsky. He's a KGB Colonel, MI6's ultimate weapon, and the only person who knows how to stop an imminent nuclear holocaust. But to save the world, he's making a cold-blooded calculation. He is about to trade the lives of his wife and daughters for the survival of the West. He's a hero to history, but a ghost to his family. That morning, he sat in his Moscow apartment, watching his wife Layla and his daughters move through the kitchen. He watched them with the precise attention of a man watching a countdown. The steam from the coffee, the way the July light hit the table. He was memorizing a life he was about to destroy. There was no room in a trunk for photographs, and there was no room in the plan for a goodbye. Then he went for a run. It looked like exercise. It was actually a vanishing act. He plunged into the chaotic crowds of the World Festival of Youth, thousands of tourists, a sea of noise and color. And somewhere in that human ocean, it's a colonel of the KGB simply disappeared. Trains, buses, the forest. But he was not just moving toward the border, but he was moving toward a point of no return. The signal had already been given days before, at a spot near the Hotel Ukraina on a Tuesday evening at 7:30. A red shopping bag from the American supermarket Safeway held visible in his hand. Nothing more. The British watchers had been passing that same point every single Tuesday for 3 years, rain or shine, carrying their own signal, a bag from Harrods, a Mars bar held in a hand. They passed regardless of whether Gordievsky was there. They passed to make the routine look like routine. And on that particular Tuesday, the two signals met, and the machinery that had been waiting to move began to move. The car crossed, and the dogs circled, and then Sibelius. The opening bars of Finlandia filled the car. It was not just music, it was the sound of a closing door. Behind him, 3 people were still sleeping in Moscow. They would wake up in a world that would never forgive them for a crime they did not know they'd committed. Gordievsky was free. But as the car accelerated into the finished night, he realized that freedom has a price, and he had already decided who would pay it. To understand why a man would betray his country, you have to understand that Oleg Gordievsky was a prince of the Soviet state. He did not grow up in the bread lines or the gray slums. He was born in 1938 into the aristocracy of the shadows. His father was an officer of the NKVD, the men who carried out Stalin's purges. His brother followed the same path. In the Gordievsky home, they did not talk about the famine or the gulags. Those things were like a smell everyone recognized, but no one named. Oleg grew up in an apartment on a good street. In Moscow, good meant the shops actually had food. It meant your neighbors were also high-ranking spies. The children in his building shared a secret knowledge. They knew what their fathers did for a living, and they carried that knowledge silently, like a stone in a pocket. Silence was not just a habit, it was discipline. It was survival. Oleg was brilliant. While other boys played with balls, Oleg played with languages: German, Swedish, Danish, English. To him, a new language was not just a tool for speaking, it was a window. And every window he opened showed him a world that looked nothing like Moscow. Naturally, the KGB was watching. In 1962, they invited the young man with the perfect grades for a pleasant conversation. There was no dramatic oath, just a polite room, a few men in suits, and a door that, once you walked through, would never open the same way again. Oleg did not join because he was afraid. He joined because he wanted to be inside the machine that moved the world. The KGB did not use threats. They used flattery. They gave him forbidden books, Western clothes, and a passport. He was living in a cage, but the cage was so heavily gilded that for a long time it did not feel like one. Then came 1966. His first posting? Copenhagen. To a man from Moscow, Copenhagen was a hallucination. The streets were too clean, the shops were too full. But it was not the abundance that shocked him. It was the looseness. He saw a woman laugh too loudly in a cafe. He saw a man argue with a shopkeeper. He saw children running in a park without anyone looking over their shoulder. They were not just happier than Soviet citizens. They were not afraid. Standing on those clean Danish streets, Gordievsky realized the truth. The Soviet Union was not a superpower. It was a lie. And he was now a professional guardian of that lie. August 21st, 1968, Prague. The Soviet tanks did not come to crush an army. They came to crush an idea. Gordievsky watched the invasion from his comfortable apartment in Copenhagen. On the screen, steel columns rolling through narrow streets, Czech citizens weeping, the death of a dream called socialism with a human face. And in that moment, something inside Oleg snapped. He realized the system he served was not just flawed. It was a machine designed to destroy hope. He saw the logic of the Kremlin with a new, terrifying clarity. And for the first time, he was afraid of the country that had made him. British intelligence, MI6, had been watching him. They knew he was different. They did not approach him like a spy in a movie. There were no bribes, no threats. It was a slow seduction of the mind. A lunch, a conversation about philosophy, a shared interest in history. They did not ask him to betray his country. They just asked him questions. And Oleg, who had spent his life hiding the truth, found he could not stop answering. By 1974, the deal was sealed. Oleg Gordievsky was now a British asset. But here's the detail that shocks most people. He asked for no money. He did not want to be a mercenary. He wanted to be a force of history. He wanted to be the man who saw what others refused to see. The KGB gave him travel and clothes. MI6 gave him something far more dangerous, a sense of purpose. For the next 8 years, Oleg lived a lie that would have broken a normal man. He was posted back to Moscow, then Copenhagen, then Moscow again. To his colleagues, he was a rising star of the KGB. To his family, he was a loving husband and father. But every document he photographed, every name he whispered to his handlers, was a hammer blow to the Soviet system. He was a ghost inside the machine. He did not dwell on the cost. He did not think about the fact that every dinner with his wife was a performance. Every smile at his daughters was a deception. He believed he was becoming indispensable. He was shaping the world from the shadows. The price of that power would be calculated later. For now, the secrets were all that mattered. In 1982, the KGB sent Gordievsky to London. It was the promotion of a lifetime. But there was a secret. MI6 had literally engineered his career. To make him look like a superstar to Moscow, the British fed him chicken feed, genuine but low-grade secrets. They even helped remove his rivals. By 1985, Oleg Gordievsky was the acting resident, the head of all KGB operations in London. He was now the nexus. Every cable from the Kremlin, every spy report, every paranoia-fueled order from Moscow passed through his hands first. He was serving the Soviet state, just not the one his colleagues imagined. In the autumn of 1983, the world almost ended. NATO was conducting a massive military exercise called Able Archer 83. It was so realistic that the Soviet leadership panicked. They were convinced the West was using the drill as a cover for a real nuclear first strike. The Kremlin's finger was on the button. Paranoia had become a policy. It was Gordievsky who whispered to MI6, "They're not bluffing. They're terrified. If you do not stop, they will fire." Because of that one man's warning, the West toned down the exercise. They de-escalated. The world survived a nuclear war it never even knew was coming. Gordievsky had not just passed documents. He had saved civilization. Stories like this are often buried in classified archives, but they deserve to be told. If you value deep dives into the hidden history of the Cold War, hit that subscribe button and join our community. Let's uncover the truth together. But his influence did not stop at war. He began to shape peace. In 1984, a rising Soviet star named Mikhail Gorbachev visited London. Gordievsky was working both sides of the table. He briefed the Soviets on how to talk to Margaret Thatcher. Then he briefed Thatcher on Gorbachev's hidden reformist streaks. When Thatcher famously said that Gorbachev was a man we can do business with, she was, in many ways, reading from Gordievsky's script. He was the invisible architect of the relationship that would eventually end the Cold War. Years later, Oleg would sit in the Oval Office, advising Ronald Reagan himself. He had no army, no budget, and no official title, but he had the most valuable currency in history: information. He felt a sense of vindication. He had been right about the Soviet lie. He had been right to betray it. But as he sat in those grand rooms with prime ministers and presidents, the bill for his success was being sent to a small apartment in Moscow. The nuclear war that did not happen would never thank his wife or daughters. The history books would celebrate the peace, but they would not record the schoolyard taunts or the 6 years of poverty and fear his children were about to endure. Gordievsky knew this. He had made the calculation. To save the world, he had to sacrifice his home. And he was perfectly fine with that. In March 1985, a man in Washington, D.C. signed Oleg Gordievsky's death warrant. His name was Aldrich Ames, a CIA officer who had secretly turned for the KGB. He handed Moscow a list of names. Among them was the acting resident in London. The KGB did not rush. They did not arrest Oleg at his desk. They moved with the slow, agonizing patience of a predator. On May 16th, they sent him a telegram. "Return to Moscow for routine confirmation of your post." Oleg knew. He knew it was a trap. But he also knew that if he did not go, he'd be hunted instantly. He boarded the flight on May 19th, There was no promotion waiting. Instead, there was a dacha in the woods and a bottle of cognac laced with psychotropic drugs. For 5 hours, Gordievsky sat in a haze, fighting to keep his secrets locked inside a brain that was being chemically dismantled. The KGB interrogators leaned in, watching his eyes, waiting for the one slip, the one name, the one confession. Oleg held. He lied with the precision of a master, even while the room spun and his heart hammered against his ribs. They did not have enough to execute him, yet. They stripped him of his rank, gave him a fake desk job, and put him under 24-hour surveillance. Every move he made, every breath he took was recorded. The walls were closing in. It was no longer a question of if he would be caught, but when. On July 19th, Oleg made his move. He stood near a bakery, holding a red Safeway shopping bag. It was the signal MI6 had been waiting for 3 years. The machinery of the most daring extraction in Cold War history began to grind into gear. But before the car, before the trunk, and before the potato chips, there was a morning. Oleg sat at his kitchen table. His wife, Layla, was making breakfast. His 2 small daughters were arguing over cereal. It was a scene of total, fragile normalcy. Oleg watched them. He memorized the way his daughter tilted her head. He watched the light hit the coffee, and he said, nothing. He did not leave a note. He did not whisper a warning. Layla had no idea her husband was a double agent. She had no idea that by lunchtime, her life would be over. Gordievsky had made a cold-blooded calculation. If he told her, she would have to lie to the KGB. If she failed, she'd be tortured. If he took them with him, the escape would fail. So, to save himself and his secrets, he chose to leave them behind as human shields. He stood up, put on his gear, and said he was going for a run. He did not look back with anguish. He did not hesitate at the door. He walked out with the cold clarity of a man who had already weighed the lives of his children against his own survival and found the price acceptable. Oleg Gordievsky was a hero who saved the world from nuclear war. But as he stepped out into the Moscow morning, he was also something else. A man who had just made his own family the primary target of the most dangerous intelligence service on Earth. The fallout was immediate. Within weeks, 31 Soviet spies were kicked out of London. Moscow retaliated by expelling 25 British diplomats. It was the biggest diplomatic earthquake of the Cold War. In November 1985, a Soviet court sentenced Oleg Gordievsky to death. That sentence was never rescinded. It outlived the Soviet Union, outlived the Cold War, and remained on the books like a ghost, waiting for a country that no longer existed to carry it out. But while the sentence hung over his head, Oleg's new life in London was a triumph. In 2007, Oleg stood in Buckingham Palace. Queen Elizabeth II pinned the Order of St. Michael and St. George to his chest. It's the same honor worn by the fictional spy James Bond. The irony was perfect. He was a hero. He was a celebrity. He was invited to the most exclusive gentlemen's clubs in London, where Margaret Thatcher herself would lean in to congratulate him. He had won. But history is a double-entry ledger, and while Oleg was collecting medals, his family was paying the bill. While Oleg was drinking tea with prime ministers, his wife, Layla, was being dragged into KGB interrogation rooms. While he was writing bestsellers, his daughters were being bullied in school, labeled as the children of a traitor. For 6 years, they lived in poverty and fear. 6 years of being outcasts in a society that never forgets a betrayal. They were not spies. They were not players in the great game. They were just collateral damage in a war their father had decided to win. In 1991, as the Soviet Union collapsed, the walls finally opened. Layla and the girls flew to London. The world expected a fairy tale ending. The hero reunited with his family. But reality is colder than fiction. The man who stepped forward to meet them was not the father they remembered. He was a stranger who had moved on. The marriage did not last. Layla initiated a divorce, reclaimed her name, and took her children. She sued him in a British court, a final, legal demand for the 6 years of her life he had stolen without asking. Oleg Gordievsky lived out his days in a quiet house in Surrey, behind a high fence. He listened to classical music, and he gave interviews. He remained the living embodiment of a Western victory. He died alone on March 21st, 2025. Somewhere in his house, tucked away in a box, lies that medal from the Queen. A piece of metal on a ribbon. A symbol of a man who saved the world from a nuclear nightmare. But as the screen fades to black, we have to ask the question, how do we measure a life like Oleg's? Is he the hero who prevented the end of civilization? Or is he the man who sat at a breakfast table, looked his daughters in the eye, and decided their lives were a price he was willing to pay? Maybe he was both. I'm Victor Red. Tell me in the comments, was the price of peace too high? And would you have walked out that door?